All right. Well, while we wait for hopefully a few more folks to join in, I want to welcome Sarah and Hanan for joining us and congratulate our 6 scholarship recipients again for receiving their awards last spring and uh, having a wonderful summer, both away from the computer and at their respective online camps. I know they've all reported to me having wonderful experiences and are going to be sharing not only their experiences from their last year of debate, but also what they've shared at and learned at camp over this last summer. So I'm looking forward to hearing and seeing what they've worked so hard to present. But before we get to that, I want to very briefly present a little bit of information that is going to be very helpful to anybody who will be coming into online debate for the first time or runs into maybe some technical issues on the NSDA campus software that maybe they got lucky to avoid last year. Those can crop up at any time in any round. I think we all know that it can be a rough experience debating online, and NSDA campus is not perfect, but it's what we have. And they have undoubtedly made a lot of progress this year to improve it, and I'm excited to see the evolution of it in our September tournament and October tournament, but it will still not be perfect, so it's going to be a learning experience for all of us. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead very quickly and try to get screen sharing working. All right, so if you've logged into Tabroom before, which everybody logged in currently should have, this is going to be the page you see when you first log in. It is very important to make sure that you have your current email address linked to your account. That is going to be your email address up top that you use to register. Your coach can verify that the entry that they are registering is linked to or has your active email address linked when they go to the competitors tab. If they click on your name, it will show what address they have linked to that. And they can simply unlink it if needed and type in a new email address to get that linked. If you are not getting emails by round 1 with your pairings, then you know that something is wrong and you need to get that fixed with your coach as quickly as possible. The other thing that is very useful to do, and I recommend everybody do this, especially if you are debating from a large school, is to go down to the competitors tab on the home page, or the competing tab, go to standing conflicts. And if you have a parent who is going to be judging, add their email address and search for them so that you can ensure that they will not judge you. Because when we have small divisions with large schools judging or entered, we sometimes have to allow parents to judge the school that their child attends. And while we do our best to ensure that parents do not judge their own students, it is not always possible to make sure that that doesn't happen. What you can do to ensure that that doesn't happen is go to that section, standing conflicts, and put in that information. That's a great thing to do as well if you've had to transfer schools for whatever reason, and you can put in your previous coach's email to ensure that your old coach doesn't judge you if you don't want your old coach judging you. Finally, it is always a good idea to make sure you have Jitsi installed on your phone or a tablet if you have it, not just your computer. So if you run into a problem where it's not working, you have another device that you can fall back on. There are apps available. In the Apple Store, Jitsi Meet, and in the Google Play Store, Jitsi Meet. So whether you have an Android phone or an iPhone, all you have to go is log into Tab Room, click the video link, and it will open right up into the Jitsi Meet app. If you run into a problem where you can't hear your judge, where you can't hear your competitors, switch over to your phone, switch over to a tablet, use that instead. You can still debate off your computer, but that way your competitors and your judges can hear you and see you without having to worry about spending 10 or 15 minutes trying to troubleshoot. If that still doesn't work, then we can go into emergency management mode and try to figure out what exactly is going on. But the most important thing is to get that round finished. And if you can get the round finished first, it's a lot easier to troubleshoot later when you're not worried about competing and having all of that stress added on top of it. And of course, make sure you're using Chrome, because Jitsi will not work in other browsers. It may work in Chrome-based browsers like Brave or Edge, but if you run into issues, it is best to fall back on the original Chrome, even if you're only using it for tournaments. That is all I have to begin with, and we will switch over to our lovely presentations from our campers. And I believe Elena has a prior commitment at her school, so we will start with Ms. Beckett.
Okay, so I chose to do my slideshow on like uses of emotion, because that's something that I kind of had to work with a lot and understand how to use that appropriately. So what exactly like is appropriate in a debate setting? So you have to avoid being like over emotional and like maybe like raising your voice. Like it's not an argument. It has to be more formal. I have a lot of people come to me and say, hey, I kind of want to join the debate team. And one of the first things I tell them is that it's not like arguing with somebody over comments on Instagram. It's formal and it's very set up, and it's not always the topic that you're extremely interested in. So you can't really get over emotional or like yell at somebody, because that's just obviously not formal. You shouldn't get offended. It's not a competition. It's just a competition. It's just a formal debate. I had somebody personally get really she apologized because she thought that I was offended, but I just had to explain that it's just debate. Like you shouldn't really get offended over something. And you have to keep calm too. You shouldn't really get too nervous or overthink what you're going to say. Just kind of breathe, Using emotion to your advantage is really important. You can tap into the sort of like pathos that you'll learn in like basic English classes, and get your judge more emotionally connected to your speech than the other speech, which will give you an advantage and will make them more likely to vote for your ballot because they feel an emotional connection to what you're saying. Get them to put themselves into somebody else's shoes. Explain the situation that your topic might put somebody in or might get somebody out of, and get them to really understand what that specific person is going through, even if you're like completely just making up a situation that could happen or would happen or that you could see being plausible. Just get them to put themselves into that character's shoes. Something that I really like to use and something that we talked about at my camp a lot was utilitarianism. I don't think there was a day that went by when we didn't cover something under utilitarianism. I like to use it as a value criterion in my debates a lot. It basically is just whatever's better for the majority of people. So that can often play in with emotion and things like that, because whatever is better for the most people is often what could be considered morally correct, at least is easier to see as morally correct. So morals and kind of get people to feel like that's morally correct, so I have this emotional connection to that, and it all just kind of ties into this big loop, like a big circle. So to specifically like tap into your judge's emotions is very important, because they're at the end of the day the person that you're trying to influence. So you definitely use cross-ex. We talked about cross-ex a lot too in my debate camp, about how important that is, about good structures of questions and et cetera, et cetera. So you can really use that to dive into what would be considered morally correct and different emotions in different situations. I have often found myself asking questions like human and mental emotional well-being is less important than this, or are you saying that like the value of a human life is less than blank? I like to use that because the value of a human life usually, more often than not, for sure, is morally more important than almost any other topic you could come up with. So that'll kind of like strike an emotional spot in judges and opponents more often than not, at least I've found. And yeah.
All right, thanks, Elena. I think definitely brought up some really great points, especially about the importance of remaining neutral and calm in debate. I know if people like to think about debate and especially Lincoln Douglas as being the calmer of the two formats. And I know I've seen some public forum crossfires that make that seem true, but it's definitely very important to remember that as important as bringing that pathos and emotion into the round is, that it's too easy to cross over into the dark side sometimes. What are there any ways that you find help keep you grounded? Maybe when you've had a particular testy round, or do you find that's not an issue for you?
There was one specific round that I found myself in over, it was guaranteed childcare, I believe was the topic. And the person I was with was pulling all of her last stops. The person, my opponent, she was trying to pull everything that she could, because the round was almost over and she felt as though she was losing, which is completely understandable. That's what we're supposed to do, right? And I didn't take anything personally, but she had mentioned something about good parents shouldn't work night shift because they want to be with their child. I'm so sorry. And when I used that emotion to my advantage, she felt as though I was offended, which I wasn't, and she ended up reaching out to me and apologizing and everything else. So honestly, I just remember that it's a club, it's a competition, it's not like personal. I don't actually know these people. So
Just trying to make sure you stay above it and remember that it's just words at the end of the day. Thank you, Elena. All right. What's next? And I lost my order that I had prepared. I believe Victoria and Prisha were working on a combination. Let's go on with the two of you if you're both ready.
All right, Prisha, can you pull up the presentation and share it?
Yeah. All right, well, if you all can see. Can everyone see the screen? Victoria, is it working?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead and get started.
All right, so this is our presentation on Crossfire by me, Victoria Fu, and my partner, Prisha Tyagi.
Yeah. Hi guys, my name is Prisha Tyagi. I'm a freshman at DuPont Manual LD. I'm experienced in LD and public forum. This is my 6th year doing debate, and I hope you guys enjoy the presentation. I hope this helps you. But as like a short disclaimer ahead of time, this presentation is a mix of public forum and LD concepts. So if you're confused about something, it may not apply to you. So just check with your coach after round or ask us, and yeah, we can go ahead and get started. Victoria, do you have anything else?
All right. Also to add, yeah, I'm also a freshman at Manual. I've been doing debate for probably 2 or 3 years in public forum. All right. On to our table of contents. So we'll be briefly going over an intro to Crossfire, talking about question types, what you should do and what you should not do, and different types of debaters and debating styles. So what is Crossfire? Basically, Crossfire is the only time during a debate round where you get to personally interact with your opponents, one-on-one or 2 versus 2. And during this time, you will want to poke holes in your opponent's case to attack theirs and, of course, defend yours against their arguments.
All right, so next, I'm going to be talking a little bit on whether CX is a science or an art. So real quickly, I want you to think in your head, do you think CX is more of an art or a science? So the answer is, it's actually a bit of both. Like science, CX is very formulaic. If you want specific answers, you have to ask specific questions. You also need to identify variables and solutions. Variables being you, your opponent, anything impacting CX, solutions being your end goal, your concession, or whatever it is you want to get out. You also need to have a lot of experimentation. Your question won't always work out perfectly the first time. Sometimes you'll need to experiment in a practice round, and then you'll realize, okay, maybe this was a good question, or maybe it was a bad question. Can I use it again, or should I just get rid of it? And lastly, CX requires steps before getting to the solution. Like science, if you need to create like some type of chemical, you don't get your chemical immediately. You have to first add, you have a like specific methodology, right? So you have to add maybe chemical 1, chemical 2, then you have to stir a bit, wait a bit, then you add chemical 3 and 4, stir and repeat the process, right? And then finally you get your solution. With CX, you have to ask a bunch of follow-up questions before you get your answer that you're looking for. And like jazz, CX is not planned ahead of time. It's completely freestyle. Well, maybe not completely, because you can write questions pre-round, but even if you create like a mind map, right, with yes and no answers, the CX you wrote on your piece of paper will never be the same as what's happening in round. In round, you know, really it's because you're dealing with human beings, right? And with human beings comes variation. So even if you write it down on paper, you are going against a human, right? So it's not going to, they will think of an answer that maybe you had not thought of ahead of time, right? So having those sets of questions beforehand can help you bounce off of them to create a new question in round, but they'll never rely on just those questions you wrote, because those questions and those answers you wrote down will never be the exact same. The best CXers are always those who can always think on their feet. So if you're worried about not being able to think on your feet, just practice a bit and you'll get it.
All right, so what is the purpose of Crossfire? You can remember these by remembering the 3 C's, which would be to clarify, contradict, and not to contradict yourself, but to spot your opponent's contradictions and to force your opponent into concessions. What you should definitely not do during crossfire is descend into chaos or ask improper questions, which I'll give more examples of later. So first of all, let's go over some general purpose crossfire etiquette that works for every single round. So the first speaker of the team who wins first usually asks the first question, and that would be the person who delivered the very first constructive of the entire round. You can say something like, I believe I have first question as I was first speaker, and that makes you sound really professional, and of course it gives you first question. So remember that you are trying to convince your judge. So even though you answer your opponents, you should target the judge and make eye contact with them while answering. Obviously, you should not descend into screaming matches. This happens like terrifyingly often during like national level debates, and is the reason why many national level judges like do not consider anything that is said during crossfire and probably go off to play Candy Crush on their phone instead. I'm kidding, but you get the idea. All right, so more specifics about crossfire etiquette. So of course you can ask follow-up questions to push points. This is considered somewhat aggressive. Of course you don't want to be rude, so it's generally better to ask if you can have a follow-up question just by saying something like, can I have a follow-up question? Again, remember that you are trying to convince your judge here since they're the most important person in the round. And even though you should answer your opponents, you really need to target the judge. Also, do not let your opponent say that you can only answer yes or no. So some opponents will be like, do you agree that death is bad? And then they'll be like, you can only answer yes or no. Obviously, if you answer, yeah, I think death is bad, they're going to bring that into their own case, and then that will basically be a concession. So I'll get more into how you can answer this later, but if they say that you can only answer yes or no, you can say something like, well, it actually depends, and I'm not going to answer yes or no because it depends on the situation, right? So if your opponent starts ranting on and using up the clock, we all know like debaters be like, do act like this sometimes, right? Instead of directly answering your question and moving on, they'll just rant on and on about their topic and waste time. So you can politely and firmly cut them off and say, thank you, do you have a question? And that will usually get the debate round on faster. So you should also be clear and concise when asking or answering questions. Again, you don't want to rant on and on either. Okay, so now we're on to the three types of questions. First of all is clarification. So these are the questions you ask to understand your opponent's arguments, such as their links, impacts, contentions, etc., etc. So offensive clarification is not clarification that is offensive as in a rude manner, but more as like the opposite of defensive. So you're using it to attack your opponent's case. So these are questions that clarify misconceptions in their argument in an offensive manner, like what is the timeline of a project? What is the goal? Will it work? And what is the purpose of so and so? So for example, if they have like, if they're trying to push a project, like the resolution is that they should pass a project that will, I don't know, reduce the number of homeless people, then you can ask a question like, what is the timeline of this project and how fast will it reduce the number of homeless people? And if they don't have a timeline, then you can say something in your future speeches like, Judge, they don't even have a timeline and their case is based around hypotheticals. We don't even know how long it would take to reduce the amount of homeless people. Well, we've actually proven the very real and very impending downsides of passing this bill. All right, so what you should not do while clarifying is you should not waste time on unnecessary clarification, and you should not ask questions about cards unnecessarily. So for beginner debaters, most of the time, and this is understandable, they'll have trouble like coming up with questions to ask. So they'll be like, can I have your first contention? Can I have the card for this? And then this doesn't even like come into handy for their speeches. So of course, I was guilty of this myself when I was like a beginner debater. If you really did not hear their contention or if you want them to clarify, of course it's okay to ask this. But if you really did know and you're just trying to run out the clock, try to come up with a better question, please. And for asking questions about cards, you should do this if the evidence in that they're discussing seems incorrect or out of context. Like they say something like, I don't know, this president has a 99% approval rating. Obviously, that's not going to be accurate at all. So you're going to want to ask for the context behind this. And of course, you should not let the opponent spread out their case again. So ranting on and on, asking too many clarifications allows your opponents to make more points, back these points up with even more evidence. And of course, that makes it harder to rebut, right? Because you have more stuff to rebut now. All right. And Next is contradiction. So this is harder to define, but I'll try my best. So this is like the evidence that does not align with the current status quo or the current universe. And also, if a speaker contradicts their own point to rebut yours, you should probably point that out, right? Like there are some arguments that just go against both sides. Like you can say something that goes against both pro and con. And if the opponent brings that up, then they're not only negating your case, they're also negating their own. So that's basically a double-sided sword, right? So you want to confirm a contradiction, but you don't want to push it too much. So you also want to bring it up as a point in your next speech. What you should not do is ask questions about their evidence without having evidence of your own to back it up. Even if it's just like some basic evidence supporting your side, if you don't have any evidence at all and they try to counter your questions, that just makes you look bad. You also cannot contradict yourself when answering. That's pretty self-explanatory, right? Don't waste time on pushing and focusing on an opponent's contradictions. Again, this allows them more chance to defend themselves, re-clarify the contradictions for in crossfire, and then basically you've lost the argument that they have contradicted themselves. Even if it does make them look bad, you still like don't want to push it too much because you're basically losing the ability to like emphasize that point. Okay, and finally we have concession questions. So these are questions that force your opponents to concede a point or argument, which of course leads into your own side and benefits your points. So to push concessions, if your opponent begins to concede on a point, obviously you want to keep pushing it. So you can't be rude, but having one concession can like lead to another, and that can lead to a major ground for your case. What you should never, ever, ever do in Crossfire is you should never concede, no matter what. So even the smallest concessions can come back to bite you, and by conceding, you're basically asking the judge to write your opponent's team name down as the winners on the ballot. So playing devil's advocate, what you want to do here, if your opponent says something like, do you want to save lives, as I mentioned earlier, you should not concede by saying something like, yes. You can instead say something like, it depends. Our side will actually save more lives because, and then you can lead back into your own points, which of course is much more convincing for the judge. All right, now Prisha will talk about the different types of debaters, how to counter them, and the pros and cons of each one.
Yeah, so quickly before I go on, I just want to add into the do not concede part. Any person I have ever mentored knows this by heart, but do not ever, ever, ever concede. Because no matter how small your concession is, your opponent can link that to other things within their case to make it seem like you have completely lost around. So even if you have to somehow like crazily talk your way around it, do that instead of conceding. All right, next, So I'm going to be touching base on the different styles of CXers during a debate round. So the reason this is so important is because knowing what style of CXer you are can help you get better at that style and help your CX just move a lot better, flow a lot better overall. So the first type is the teacher. So I'm pretty sure we've all encountered these people at one time, but they're overly teacherly and they talk way too long. The pros of this person is that you seem super smart because in order to talk for a long time, you have got to have really good knowledge. You are also really good at wasting time because you just talk for a long time. Teachers tend to give out information first and then they give you their answer. So if you ask them to clarify, like if you ask a teacher, CXer, right, to restate convention, don't ever do that because they're going to end up saying their entire case before they get to what you want. So if you're going at someone like that, be specific and be like, can you please restate the tagline of your convention 2 subpoint A? Be very specific. They're also very good at avoiding answers. This is because since they talk so much, they're really good at talking their way around things, which is what I touched on earlier. So you won't even realize what they're doing until like they've stopped talking and you realize that they didn't even answer your question. They can also stop their point for certain things because they can anticipate what's going to be the next question and they touch on it ahead of time to make their opponent seem like, oh wait, you know what, that's not a good idea. Next is the cons. So one con is that it may seem like you don't want to engage. If you're talking for time, it may give the judge the impression that you are constantly trying to avoid answers and you really do not want to engage in the debate, which is not an impression you want to give your judge. You may also seem condescending. If you have If you do this with a lot of attitude, you may make it seem like you have so much more knowledge than your opponent, which can also make you seem very condescending, and judges are not going to vote for debaters they don't like. You might also give out a wholer attack, right? So if you're talking about like Locke, right, and for some reason you go, well, in order to understand Locke, you got to understand utilitarianism, right? And now your opponent has no idea who Locke is. They don't understand how to attack Locke, but they know util very, very well. So by connecting it to util, you are now saying that in order to understand Locke, you need to have util. So if you can take down util, then you can take down Locke. So now you have just given your opponent a path to the ballot, which you do not want to do ever. It's almost just as bad as conceding. All right, next is the jokers. These are a little bit more rare because, not everything is funny in debate, but it's in the name. They try to be super funny all the time, and they make jokes to take up time. So if you've probably been against these people at least once. Some people haven't at all, and I find that kind of shocking. But the pros of this debater is that judges really like this debater. Debate can get really boring, especially for parent judges. Parent judges are going through these rounds for like 12 hours a day, right? And they're seeing high schoolers, middle schoolers, they're looking at teenagers argue about something that doesn't even impact their personal lives. Because of that, they can sometimes end up zoning out. If going against this debater, make everything seem not funny. The cons of this debater is that not everything is funny. Racism, famine, extinction, it's not funny. If you're constantly making jokes, it may even seem like you're trying to run away from the debate. Once again, you don't want to make your judge think that. All right, the aggressive debater. This one doesn't even need a definition. We've all been against this person, or we are this person, or we've seen this person. Turning over the cons, if you make your opponent cry, you're going to end up losing. Like I said earlier, judges want to vote for debaters they like. And if you're mean and rude and you're making people cry, judges don't want to vote for you. The other problem with this one is that it can get kind of offensive. So in debate, there is bit of a divide. I don't think our league really struggles with this, but in nationally speaking, there is sometimes a divide. And that divide is that the major debaters are always white and Asian males, and the minority debaters tend to be females of color, right? So if you are a majority male yelling at your female opponent, a female of color opponent during cross-ex, that can get very offensive sometimes. So there is a line, you just have to make sure not to cross it. So you can be an aggressive debater without being offensive, but you just have to be very careful not to actually cross that line. The pro to this persona is that you control the debate. Being the loud figure, being the dominant figure, you dominate the round. You control the issues going on in the round. So most issues will be, whether your opponent actually decides to go on those issues or not, you're the one controlling what issues are actually being talked about in the debate round. And that can actually have that's a huge advantage because there's so many different benefits associated with that one benefit. Next, the Buzz Killington. This person is short answers, perfectly average, and nonchalant. So calm. The pros to this person is that they're the ultimate neutralizer to any other persona. The con to this person is that they can get kind of boring. So if you're not really loud, really funny, not aggressive, you can get kind of boring to listen to, right? Because you're like perfectly average. Now, if you're the Buzz Killington, not a problem. That's not a bad thing, but you can get boring. And one thing I try to tell my debaters or people I've coached is that it doesn't matter how good you write your speech on your Google Doc. It doesn't matter how many good cards you have when writing your speech. What matters is how much of it your judge actually remembers. The version of your speech on the paper is gone. It does not matter. The version of the speech in your judge's head is what's actually important. If your judge isn't listening to you, they're not going to understand anything happening in the debate, which is a huge downside to you. Next, you can also be swayed to the other side. What this means is that because the Buzz Killington isn't like the aggressive debater, and they don't take a very strong stance on the debate, right? So because of your very calm attitude, because of how put together you are, and not taking a very strong stance, it can be a little bit easier for you to be swayed to the other side versus other debaters. All right, Victoria found a really nice quote she wanted to share with everyone.
All right, so this quote basically says, "It is better to debate a question without settling it than to settle a question without debating it." And it's by a French writer named Joseph Joubert. So I really think that this quote is actually really good because it applies to a lot of things in debate, and especially Crossfire, right? So in Crossfire, this is the time we get to engage 1v1 or 2v2 with our opponents. And this is the time that we get to truly like bring out our personalities as a speaker and as like someone who debates, and not just like as someone who's just reading speeches to the judge. So yeah, I feel like this quote is just really helpful, and it says a lot about everything that we do in debate.
All right. Well, I hope you've heard to this presentation throughout the season and that your cross-ex is greatly improved because of our presentation. If anyone has questions, feel free to ask them. I know we have a bit of a small audience today, but for those of you watching, I hope that you took notes. I hope that, this presentation gives you some insight and that you have an amazing season.
All right. Thank you, Prisha. Thank you, Victoria. Ultimate question, what are your cross-ex styles or personalities?
Victoria, do you want to go first or you want me to go first? Okay, so, developing your style does take some time. So I think I'm still working on it, but I'm usually in the middle of I'm like 50% the teacher one and 50% the aggressive one, because I can be very ambitious at times and, I want to win the round. So, I will push on issues, but at the same time, I waste so much of my opponent's CX. There was a time where my opponent did not cut me off, so I spent the entire 3 minutes just going over my case, and they did not say anything. So I'm right in the middle of this too.
Yeah, personally, I feel like I don't really fall into one of these right now. So it probably depends on the round, right? Like sometimes there's those opponents and they ask questions where it's so easy to just spread your case, and I'm a teacher, right? And then sometimes they're just the questions that are yes or no, and then I have to answer it depends, right? Then it's probably Buzz Killington. I don't think that I'm that aggressive sometimes, but I feel like some of the Mystique debaters last year told me I was really scary. So I don't know. I honestly don't know.
It's good to have a little bit of honesty in that self-assessment. So I applaud that. Thank you both for that. It was a great presentation. All right, let's go to Emma Heck.
Okay, so my presentation is on rebuttals, and this is mostly focusing on Lincoln Douglas debate because that is what I do. Okay, so a little bit about me. My name is Emma Heck. I'm a sophomore at Assumption. I love debate, and this is going to be my second year in LD. So my debate camp experience was awesome. I got to go in person, which was really good. I learned a lot. I gained so many new friends, and I got a real new view of debate. So I'm just so thankful to the Wyatt League for this opportunity. So again, thank you so much. Okay, so important things for every debate. So number one is to have confidence. I think this is probably one of the most important things and one of the things that I've had to learn the most. So just make your judge believe you. No matter if you believe it or not, just make your judge think that that is what is true. Okay, second is to flow and pre-flow. So if you don't know what flowing is, it's like this special format of notes in debate. And so for me, I really like to do good pre-flows before the tournament, for my cases. And so when you're flowing, also just get the most important parts. So third, to speak well. So you always want to speak well. And in doing this, I like to always change up my tone. So I can be really aggressive as I speak. But if I have something that's really impactful, I'll try to calm my tone down. And it can get your judge to look at you. I've had my judge look up to me whenever I say that. And I'm like, okay, you caught their attention. And again, you can practice this by recording yourself. Okay, and number four, never give up. So even if you've messed everything up, just keep going as if nothing has happened, because you're never out of the race. I have thought there's no way I can win this, and then I've somehow won, but just make sure you never give up. Okay, so in rebuttals, you always want to have a theme. So I have a theme for your speech and tie it back through as you go through your speech. So I always open my speeches with this theme. And so phrases I love using are like, remember the bigger picture, or my opponent's missing the point, like having that main theme, that main point. So a big thing, organization. So always tell your judge where you're at, and this is called signposting. So for example, while you're in round, like while you're in your speech. So you might say, now I'm moving on to the neg, or in my opponent's third contention, like directly stating where you're at and what you're talking about. So when you do this, you don't have to spend as much time explaining your opponent's argument, and that can give them an advantage. So make sure that you're signposting, saving time, and not giving your opponent that advantage. And then explaining before your speech. So this is called an off-time roadmap. And so to do this, before the speech even starts, before your time has started, you say, I'm going to give a brief off-time roadmap. And so for me, or for whatever speech you're doing, you say, maybe I'm starting with a neg. And so that's going to be the case you address first in your speech. And then maybe say, then I'll move on to the af. And then you'll address that case second. Or you can say this whichever way, depending on how you like to do it. And there's many different ways you can say this, but this just helps your judge and your opponent know where to flow and know what you're talking about. So another thing, using what you already have. So you're already going to have a lot of evidence, arguments, and ideas in your case. So just use those in your rebuttals as well. And also you have what your opponent has said in cross-ex and what you've got them to say, as well as any cards that you may have made. Okay, so having multiple paths to the ballot. So in rebuttal, make sure you're having multiple attacks. So if you only have one attack and your opponent addresses that attack, then you're left with almost nothing. But if you have multiple attacks, then you have a better chance. And it's likely your opponent won't be able to address them all. And so what I like to do is for the ones that my opponent didn't address, I try to turn those into my biggest things and talk about how my opponent never addressed them and how big they are, and really blow those up as the biggest things. Okay, so like the most important thing in rebuttals for me is clash. So your arguments have to have direct conflict. So the example that I was given is you cannot have two ships like passing by each other. And so here in this little like visual up here, these ships, there's nothing happening together. They're just floating by each other. That is not what you want. So an example of this would be your opponent argues dogs are better than cats. You can't just say that cats are better than rabbits because there's no direct conflict between those arguments. Okay, so just for every speech, boil it down to the key points of tension. So ask yourself, what are the key points of tension in this round, and then focus on those things. So have a plan and make the best use of your time. So before you go into the speech, have a plan, what you're going to do, and then use all of that time. I struggled with using all of my time, but once you use all your time, it really helps. And then group arguments together when possible. And just let your judge and opponent know. So if you have the same attack on maybe two of your opponent's arguments, just say grouping these like together, or their whole contention or something like that. Okay, so make sure you're using that prep time very effectively. I like to use about half of my prep time before each speech, but that varies depending on the round and depending on how prepared I am for that speech. Okay, so set yourself up for your next speech. So make sure you're already always planning and then setting yourself up. And then just sell your argument. And for me, this means a lot of emotional appeal, which I have found very effective, and a lot of confidence as well. Just making sure that you tell your judge thinks that your argument is correct. Okay, so moving on to specifics in Lincoln Douglas. Okay, so the first negative rebuttal, this is in the first negative construction speech. So for timing, when I'm on the neg, I like to write a short case of about like 3 minutes. And so then I have about 4 minutes for my first rebuttal speech. And so what I like to do is I start attacking the affirmative, or just attacking the affirmative in that case, after you've given your speech. But you can do this either way, but I do find that it's most effective to say your neg speech and then attack your opponent. So the first affirmative rebuttal. So this is right after the negative cross-ex. And so when I'm on the affirmative, I split my time in like half for addressing my opponent and then defending mine. So what you're going to do in this speech is just get your key attacks on your opponent's case down and just don't repeat yourself. You have limited time, so spend all that time attacking your opponent's case. to the second negative rebuttal. So this is right after the first affirmative rebuttal. And so when I'm on the neg, I use about 4 to 5 minutes to address cases. And then I have some time to tell the judge about the key points or the key voting issues. And so start with the key points of tension and bring them up as they relate through the speech. Address both sides and what your opponent has said and what your opponent said in their last rebuttal. So the last affirmative speech. So this is the last speech of the whole round, and it's right after your negative second rebuttal. And so for timing, all of your time should be used to tell your judge about the key points that you think you want, or like the key voting issues. And so what those are like 2 or 3 main issues that you've carried like strong arguments for, and bring those to your judge as the biggest things in the round and tell them why you won those arguments. Okay, so thank y'all, and you're all going to do awesome this debate season. And if y'all have any questions.
All right, thank you, Emma. So that one, I really liked your idea keeping a theme throughout the speech, and I presume, although you didn't say it throughout the round, I know that can really be a great way to keep yourself focused, going back to some of those key phrases that you mentioned, and keeping yourself on track. I wonder though, how do you manage, or do you have any tips for managing that really tight time frame in the one AR? Because it is so tight, coming right after that cross examination and after a 7-minute speech. If you have any tips for that.
Yeah, for me, I like to just always focus on the biggest things. So a lot of people, they'll go like by the flow and do like every little point. But for me, I just try to pick like 2 or 3 like main things. And I would just focus really heavily on those, or I try like grouping arguments because I don't have a lot of time.
Awesome. All right, thanks, Emma. All right, let's go on. Estella, are you ready?
Yes.
All right. Yep.
So I'm going to be presenting on how to use Crossfire to your advantage. I just wanted to start off with a big thanks to Wilson Wyatt, and I got to attend the Harvard debate camp. So first, what is Crossfire? Crossfire is where 2 debaters from pro and con ask questions about each other's speeches and views on the topic. As a debater during Crossfire, you should try to do 3 things to have an effective crossfire. 1. Strategically aim at the vulnerable parts of your opponent's arguments. 2. Ask questions that will make your opponent concede to you. And 3. When answering questions about your speech, use as many resources as possible to strengthen your arguments. The importance of Crossfire. Crossfire is one of the most important occurrences in a debate round because you're able to tear down your opponent's arguments and contentions with questions that your opponent has to answer. It is also very helpful because it can show your understanding of the resolution better than your opponent's. So, the first speaker objectives for Cross. The first speaker is supposed to ask clarifying questions. For example, what was your first contention, or what was your source for this argument? You're going to want to use ethos, set the tone for the round. Using ethos in a debate means to use only credible and reliable sources to build your argument. This means not to use Wikipedia, for example. Examples of credible sites are the New York Times in some situations, or if the resolution is about the U.S. government, then you could use USA.gov. And also, you're going to want to hint at rebuttal. So you're going to want to get concessions from your opponent so that your partner can capitalize on those concessions during rebuttal. And you're going to want to ask questions that get to the point, especially yes or no questions. For the second speaker, during the crossfire, they should ask questions that undermine their opponents, what their opponents have said during rebuttal, and further attack their contentions and framework. For the grand crossfire, the most fundamental rule for grand crossfire is that teammates should not speak over each other. Communicating ideas, it's already difficult, but you shouldn't be speaking over each other because that could get you points off for the debate. Communicative goals. In a debate round, you're not only being judged on the content that you are presenting, but also your tone and how you debate. You want to demonstrate poise, establish perceptual control of the room, or appear to be dominant in the debate and get face time with the judges. 1, you're going to want to rise to be recognized in a controlled way. Because there are often more questions than there's time for a questioning period, participants often feel the need to compete with each other to be recognized. As a result, they may literally leap out of their seats or scatter papers. Instead of being recognized by the judge as unorganized, answer questions effectively and sound educated on the topic. And 2, remain standing until the speaker has completed their answer. Many debaters immediately sit down without waiting for a reply. This suggests lack of interest in the answer. They should remain standing the whole time of crossfire unless the judge asks not to. Argumentative goals. In a debate, debaters are invested in their arguments. They are attempting to advance a particular position or set of ideas against opponents. Questioning is an important way to advance their arguments. Number 1, clarify an idea, argument, or piece of evidence. If something in a speech is not clear, either because the speaker is difficult to understand or the argument is just oddly phrased, a debater may ask for a clear explanation. These questions should be used when necessary and can often help expose a weak or poorly constructed argument. Here are some examples of clarifying questions in public forum crossfire. Clarification questions can be especially important because speakers must answer their opponent's arguments. Going to 2, challenge an idea, argument, or piece of evidence. If your opponent disagrees with an argument made in a speech, the first opportunity to attack that argument will generally come during questioning. Challenges made during questioning go a long way towards establishing control of the debate. Effective questioning. Effective questioning begins with good listening. The best questions demonstrate that the questioner listened closely to the speaker and adapted to the answers given during questioning. Too many debaters ask questions just to ask questions. You have to remember that the goal of questioning is not to just ask questions, but to obtain answers that are useful in the debate. 1, you are going to want to ask questions that are brief and concise. During a debate, you are eager to ask questions. If a debater asks a particularly long question, they'll lose the opportunity to ask a question because it can be confusing sometimes. They need to be simple. Questions should have a single independent clause and at most one modifying phrase or dependent clause. If questions become too complex, they fail to communicate clearly to the judge or elicit the sought-after answer. Going to 3, they are focused. Asking brief and simple questions is easier. They are narrowly tailored to address one idea at a time. Ask one idea at a time. Questions that address multiple ideas are unlikely to obtain a clear answer. The speaker may jump from one idea to another or answer only part of the question, or possibly just become too confused by the question's complexity. Responding. Never say I don't know. If your opponents interrupt you, you can use may I please finish my response, may I please answer the question first, if you could let me finish. If your opponents force you into a yes or no question, you could answer the opposite of what they expect, or you could answer the opposite of what they expect, or say, I'm afraid it is not as simple as a yes or no answer. If your opponent asks an open-ended question, be clear and persuasive. Tips and tricks. Do not interrupt your opponent unless necessary. It is acceptable to interrupt your opponent if it is going off topic, avoiding the question, giving a speech rather than an answer. It takes more than 20 seconds to answer. When interrupting, do not just start talking. You could use if I might just interject or if I may respond. Is there any question in this? Thank you. Do you have a question for me? Or thank you and answer the question here. If they answer or ask another question, you could use may I ask a quick follow-up question first, or can you please clarify your answer first? Try to be polite but firm. Avoid coming across as aggressive, rude, or pushy. Remember, judges usually are not flowing the speech. Focus on how you are being perceived and do not sacrifice good manners to make a point. Talking points. When speaking, do not go around in circles or spend more than 45 seconds on a point. Move on. You have limited time to get your questions out. Try not to waste time on trivial details or technicalities. Stick to the major points that you will be talking about in your next speech. Thank you.
Thank you, Stella. It was a great presentation. I think you've definitely got a masterful control of crossfire down. Hopefully that'll that went very well with Christian Victoria's presentation. So I think that between the three of you, everybody watching this will be able to come out as crossfire masters. So thank you for that, your time, your presentation there. What do you think, if you had to, in addition to that, what's your one secret to crossfire?
My one secret would probably be to like undermine like their information as a whole. Like if they're using if they like use a piece of information from a really long time ago, you should like try to counter it with a piece of information that's more like recent, to show that their like debate is based off of very old evidence.
Do you get to do that a lot, do you find?
Yes.
Paying attention to details is always very important. So I like to hear that. That's good. All right. Ms. Emma Dobson, are you ready?
Yeah. It's just letting me share my screen. You don't have to change anything. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. So I also went to one of the Harvard debate camps. I did the second PF one. It was really thorough. We talked about a lot of stuff. It was really educational. I personally, I think I'm supposed to be a second speaker this year. I've done first and second speakers in PF. A lot of this could be applicable to LD just because of like how you ask questions and things like that. But I'll start with just explaining like how it relates to PF. So if you're not familiar with public forum, it's two teams of two people. First speakers and second speakers. First speakers start out by giving their 4-minute speech. We'll flip for sides and for who goes first and second. The first person will speak for 4 minutes. The second speaker will speak for 4 minutes. Then they'll do a cross-ex, and then both of the second speakers from the teams will go again for the rebuttal speeches, and then another crossfire, and then those first speakers again will go and they'll give their summary speeches. Then everybody does a grand crossfire where both speakers on both sides are involved, and then you give a final focus saying why you won the round, and each team gets 2 minutes wrap time. I won't spend too much time on crossfire because I think a lot of people have already hit on it, but some things to remember for crossfire is ask clarifying questions. I know people have been like a little like here and there on how you like ask about evidence and stuff. Personally, I think call for evidence if you like, even if they like say it in the case and you heard like their cards, like call for evidence on like their cards so you can like go on the link and you can make sure that that evidence is a legitimate like study or article and it's not an opinion piece. Because I know in the camp tournament that we had with Harvard, people were using like either they were news articles and they weren't like academic pieces, or they were like literal opinion pieces off of websites. If you can avoid using those because your opponent can call for that evidence. And then what they're going to do with that is they're going to weigh it against each other and they're going to say, judge, confirm my evidence, because not only is it like an academic piece, it's more recent and it's like facts, it's not opinions. And you can start to hint at your rebuttal in this speech and like get concessions out of your opponents. Like bring that evidence if you like call for it and you disagree with it, or like you can bring the stuff that you learned in first cross to your rebuttal speeches. But ask short questions so you can get more questions in. Don't have like long-winded questions because it just sucks up time and like makes it harder for people to get the information that they want. So after the first cross-section, you're gonna go straight into rebuttals. The goal for this is to like destroy their case. Don't be nice, don't be friendly, kill their case. murder it, take everything they have, and respond to it all. Address everything, not just the contention, not just the tagline. If like, so for the NATO topic, if their contention is Russia and the Russia threat, don't just attack Russia threat, attack every moving component of that argument. And this is really effective because if you even drop one subpoint, they're gonna bring that back and in like their final speeches and gonna be like, well, they didn't respond to this, and if this stands, the rest of the case depends on it. So then like our entire argument still stands, and it doesn't really matter what they said, because even if that isn't true, this is still true, so we maintain the route to our impacts. And prioritize quality over quantity. You don't need 5 pieces of evidence for one argument. If you have one strong piece of evidence, read that so you can like get to everything in your case and like attack everything in your opponents. And don't reread evidence. It's not the time to use it in rebuttals. It's just like not a wise way to use it, because you're gonna have time to do that in summary. And if you're gonna read evidence to support your case, read new evidence, because like it deepens like your case. For a rebuttal, you can do it in 2 different ways. You can do line by line, where you go straight through the case from beginning to end and address everything. And I personally prefer this one because it make sure you go through everything in their case. And you're looking at your flow and you're making sure you hit all the points, and you're really driving your points home and making sure you're like ending their case. If you're going first, this is why a lot of people prefer to go second, because not only do you get more prep time, but you know what the other person has said and you know what to respond to. Even if you go first, I know this says spin off 4 minutes on their case, but if like you've got 3 minutes of good responses, go ahead and like predict what they're gonna say about your own case and like provide more support for your case. Because like it's just a good thing to do to like have like things that they might have to consider when they're giving their own speech. And if you're going second, make sure you're doing a 3-1, because you're wanting to prioritize your opponent's case and making sure you're addressing all their arguments. You can start weighing in the rebuttal speech, and it's basically like comparing your 2 arguments and why the judge should prefer yours, but I'll talk about it in a later slide. For summary speeches, you're gonna respond to your opponent's case. You're gonna frontline. You're gonna make sure you've answered everything they have on the flow, making sure that like you really you address the rebuttals and you extend your arguments. You make sure you maintain like your route to your impacts, because if you don't have a way to get to the impact, it doesn't matter how bad nuclear war is or how bad any other impact you have, because if you can't access that impact, if there's no way for your argument to make it to that, then your opponent wins, because your thing isn't going to happen because you lost your route to it happening. Arguments not in summary can't be in final focus. So if there's like anything you need to respond to and you need to provide more evidence for why something is true or why it's not true, make sure you at least mention it in summary, because if you don't, then you can't bring it up in final focus. Like I said when we were talking about rebuttals, weigh impacts. This is the most important thing. This is how you write the judge's ballot. This is why you say my argument is more important. This is why you consider my argument above my opponent's. Like, sure, that might happen, but this is way worse. And it must be comparative. It must be like, this is more probable, this is more dramatic, this is more likely to happen than whatever your opponent is saying. Because we both have impacts, but which impact is more important? And they talk to us about this in camp, but like, you obviously can't say everything in your opponent's case is wrong. That's just like not how it works. What you can do though is say, even if that is true, this is why we still win. Like, even if that is the case. This is why our argument has a worse effect if we don't take the right action. And you're going to start writing the judge's ballot. And this is the purpose of weighing, telling the judge why you win and like why your arguments are more important. For grand cross, take control, divide up the task. For the usage of prep time, I'd say if you need to use it for like summary speeches and rebuttal speeches, I'd use cross-ex for that if you need to. If you don't, that's okay. But if you do have to use it before FF, which is one of the most important like things you're gonna need prep time for, just because of how like it's directly after grand cross and you're like trying to answer everything that's been said, not only throughout the round but just said 2 seconds before you speak. If you like need to like write your final focus speech, allow your partner that's speaking that speech to like use grand cross. It's okay if you're not both speaking. It might cost you some speaker points, but what's worse, speaker points are losing a round. Focus on the important cracks in the argument. You don't have to attack every little thing. Obviously, if you haven't addressed a moving part of their arguments yet, it's a good thing that you make sure you've attacked everything in their case. And you make sure like you haven't left anything untouched for them to say that like you didn't argue against it, and you conceded it for their final focus. But like focus on the big points of contention, like Emma said. If like you have two things that are directly competing against each other, and this is what you've been arguing about the entire round, this is probably what's going to decide the round. And bring attention to why your arguments are superior. Why is your impact worse? Why is your thing more probable to happen? Why is theirs unprobable? Why is it, even if that was going to happen, mine's worse? Why is nuclear war worse than sex trafficking? Why is the global suffering worse than a few select people in 1 or 2 countries suffering? What's worse? For final focus, remember quality over quantity. You don't have to attack everything in their case in FF. You don't have to address everything in FF. Address the big things, collapse on what worked and what didn't. Like make sure you like bring home your big arguments. Make sure you're addressing especially what was like the main focuses of summary and the final cross-ex, because it's what the judges remember, especially if they're parent judges. They're probably not going to be going over their flow if they float it, and they're probably just going to go off of what's been happening in the last few speeches, and that's how they're going to decide the round, what's fresh in their mind, who won it based on what's happened most recently. Make sure you're again bringing through if your evidence was better than your opponent's, why your evidence was better, and why like they lose access to their impacts, or like their links are bad, or if their arguments aren't unique. Really bring through what you said in your rebuttal, and to make sure like you've really nailed the coffin down on their cases. I think that's it.
All right. Thank you, Emma. That was very thorough. I think everybody's ready to go out and compete in public forum now after that. So you said you've been a 1 and are probably going to be a 2 this year. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've actually done both positions.
Okay. Well, I think it sounds like you're definitely ready for the change. Or, well, like you said, you've done both, but you're definitely, I can tell, well prepared. So thank you so much. And thank you to all Laney's already left, but all remaining 5 of you, those were all wonderful presentations. I'm sad that our one attending student had to leave, but this will be going up on the YouTube or the YouTube channel. Yeah, YouTube, that'd be wonderful. Our YouTube channel, so that everybody will be able to view it, so our coaches can get it out to their students, and hopefully all of this knowledge can be shared amongst all of our incoming students in the league. I know we have had a lot of folks working with JCPS to get a lot of new schools in, and of course everybody has new students coming in all the time. So thank you again for taking the time to share what you've learned over this summer and over the last year with them. And I hope you all have a wonderful evening and a great year. Thank you, everybody.